I'm in the central highlands of Scotland, exploring part of a beautiful, ancient forest that once covered much of Britain.
Whenever I come here, I don't feel as though I'm surrounded by lots of individual species. I feel as though I'm part of one great organism. The Caledonian forest itself is just so magnificent.
In this series, I'm visiting some of Britain's most outstanding areas of natural beauty to explore the fascinating wildlife that has made these places their home, this time Scotland.
The Caledonian forest forms the westernmost edge of a belt of trees that stretches like a blanket all around the planet Earth, the boreal forest. This part of that forest is dominated by Scots pines. To my mind, it's the most beautiful part of the boreal forest and the rarest. And it's home to the osprey, the capercaillie, and of course, the red squirrel.
Only 1% of the original Caledonian forest remains, scattered into 84 fragments across central Scotland. The largest is Abernethy Forest, nestled below the mighty Cairngorm Mountains. Scots pines dominate the landscape, but the Caledonian forest is actually a rich mix of other native species, birch, aspen and oak, that tower above a lush ground cover of bilberry, mosses and fallen timber. Here and there, the woodland is broken by rocky outcrops and beautiful lochs, creating the perfect habitat for a complex mix of birds, mammals and plants that are quite unique to this place. The forest is my favourite habitat to explore. Here, the smallest clues can lead to the most exciting discoveries.
When you're looking on the ground for sign, you can find all sorts of things. You can see openings in the vegetation like here that tells you that something's going backwards and forwards that's no higher than this. But you also find things that come from the trees, from creatures that live up in the canopy like this. You see this pine cone that's been ripped apart. Now, there are quite a few things that might have done that, but if I look really closely with a hand lens, I can see a telltale break at the base of that scale there that shows me that that's been chewed into by a red squirrel. You can tell that it's a squirrel because of the size of the front teeth as they've broken in. And what they're looking for are the seeds. You get little winged seeds that form at the base of each scale. Of course, when you start to see feeding sign like that, you need to check the tops of the trees as well. And what I do is I'd sit with my back to a tree and just listen for the sound of the scales of pine cones dropping to the forest floor, and then I can home in on it and spot the creature itself. Now that's a really lovely sight, a red squirrel. That red coat that they have blends so well to the tops of the pine trees. It's really good camouflage. These red squirrels have a very light tail, it's almost blonde, and that's a sign that these are indigenous squirrels to this part of Britain. And when I see them moving in the trees, I think that they're much lighter and more nimble and more delicate than the grey squirrel. They just somehow belong in this environment.
If you ask me, the red squirrel is one of our country's most adorable native mammals. But sadly, their future lies very much in the balance. Juliet is an officer with the Forestry Commission who is trying to form a strategy to protect them.
A lot of people will be more familiar with grey squirrels than red squirrels.
Yes.
Is the grey squirrel a threat to the red squirrel?
Yes, it very much so. It certainly is. The truth of the matter is they can't be in the same place. If there were greys here, they would simply eat all the food. It's a much bigger animal. They also breed more. and they would just simply eat the red squirrel out of house and home, really. But also they carry this disease which kills the reds very quickly.
This is the dreaded squirrel pox.
That's right, yes.
And how fast does that act?
Within something like 6 to 8 days.
Gosh. I had no idea.
If a red contracts it, they suddenly are unable to feed and they're unable to drink, and they just die from starvation.
Oh, that's a tragedy.
Yeah, it is.
So what's the hope? Do you think we'll succeed in keeping the red squirrels safe from this disease and this threat?
I think we've got a good chance in the Highlands. The Highlands is quite broken up, there's lots of mountains, there's lots of water, and if we're lucky, we'll be able to keep the greys from passing all the way through here.
The tall pines of the Caledonian forest are the ideal platform for the red squirrels to build their nests, called drays, in the forks of the trees.
If you look up here,
Yeah, that's good there, look.
just see it on the top.
Looks like a large football lodged
Yeah,
in a tree
that's
made
right.
of sticks.
My experience is that they're usually not at the very top of the tree,
Yeah.
whereas a bird's nest might be. And they can have several of them as well. I've heard that something like 6 or 7 per squirrel.
So it's like a summer house.
Yes,
You go
that's
for a
right.
vacation. And are those drays located then at different food sources?
They tend to be sort of fairly bunched together. So if you see several in one place, you think, oh, there's lots of squirrels. But actually, it could well just be one.
I've often, when I watch a dray like that swaying gently in the breeze there, I think about the squirrel when they have their young. And it's like a cradle rocking in the wind, isn't it?
Yes, that's true.
If you keep your eyes and ears open, you'll find the Caledonian pine forest is full of rare treats, like the charismatic crested tit and Britain's only truly endemic bird, the Scottish crossbill. That depends entirely on these forests and their pine cones for its survival. This tranquil oasis is Loch Garten, a romantic setting for this pair of goldeneye. This male is craning his neck to display to the female. The clear and unpolluted loch is also the ancestral home and important food source for one of Scotland's most spectacular predators, the osprey. These incredible birds were almost lost from our island until they re-established themselves in Scotland in the 50s. Since then, the RSPB has taken over the management of part of the Caledonian forest to protect this precious nesting habitat.
Watch your face a bit, and then we'll turn up through here.
Raptor expert Roy Dennis is taking me to a secret location to see a particular breeding pair that have just made their flight back from Africa in preparation to lay their eggs.
The nest is very obvious there. Looks like the male probably in the first tree and the female behind. This bird will be very close to laying now.
Wonderful. They are such beautiful birds.
I think he's 15 years old, at least. And this female I ringed 20 years ago. I think it's now she's reared 30 young.
They're long lives these birds have.
You know, to live to that age, 2 birds is very exceptional. You know, if you get a breeding osprey for, say, 6 years, they've already done well.
They're such an incredible success story.
You know, you come here 50 years ago, when I first came here, there was 1 pair in the whole of Britain. And then with the protection afforded by the RSPB and the private estates in Scotland, they started to increase. But in some of those early years, 40% of nests were robbed in 1 year by human egg thieves.
Amazing, isn't it? So what's the population of ospreys in the UK at the moment?
About 240 pairs in Scotland, and then, 6 or 7 or 8 in England and Wales.
So from 1 pair 50 years ago.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Really, we did lots of things, like we built artificial nests to encourage them, we secured nests so that they even fall out of trees, and all of that was aimed at increasing the production of young. Once they're given a chance, they can come back.
I think they're a magical bird to watch. It's right up there in my top few birds.
See what he's doing now, he's starting to preen, do you see? His job is to keep any other ospreys away from here, because this is his mate and he doesn't want any intruders. Usually at this time of the year they're going fishing about 7 o'clock, so they're probably already fed.
Yeah.
And he might not go away again until, you know, later in the afternoon. But they should do a wee bit more nest building. What ospreys are brilliant at is doing nothing.
Thanks to the conservation efforts of Roy and the RSPB, the future looks bright for this beautiful bird.
I love the scale and the majesty of this forest, but despite all of that, to really get a sense of how it would once have been, I have to find the giant trees, like this pine here. This would have been a sapling at about the time of the Great Fire of London, and it's one of only a handful of trees that have survived from that time. But look at the scale of it.
These multi-branch trees with fat trunks are known as granny pines.
You can see this axe cut here. Now that's not the cut of an amateur. In the early 1800s, most of these big pines were ring-barked. The cut was made all the way around the tree in the hope of killing it so that the land could be more easily cleared for sheep grazing. But this tree was tenacious, and you can see an indentation all the way around the bark. You can see here, but it healed over, and for that reason it's still standing today. In its dotage, maybe only a few decades of life left, but what a wonderful, majestic tree it is.
These soaring pines form the backbone of an ecosystem on which many other plants and animals depend.
This is the horse's hoof fungus, although some people call it the tinder fungus, because for tens of thousands of years, our ancestors used to produce a very fine tinder from this mushroom that they could use to catch a spark when lighting the fire. You need a fairly stout knife for this job. This isn't a job for a penknife. If you're using too delicate a knife, there's a risk you'll cut yourself. You can hear from the sound how tough this layer is. It's really strong material. What I'm starting off is the manufacture of a material that was later on in history given the name Amadou. It's quite interesting because it has quite an association with Scotland, because you can still buy this material in expensive fly fishing shops because it's the best material for drying a fly. So there's the bit I'm interested in. On the back, I have these tubes here that run down. That's the spore-bearing part of the fruit body here. I need to cut those off now. So basically what I'm doing is I'm removing any hard pieces so that I'll be left with only the soft. So that's the part that's useful, this piece here. For firelighting, people will carry with them a little pouch, maybe something like this. This is the sort of pouch that was used in Lapland by the Sami. And in here you have some of the fungus which has been massaged till it's very, very soft. And if you just tear or fray the edge, it'll take a spark even better. Put that on the edge of the flint, because the sparks will go upwards, and there we go. And once you get a bit going, you can tear off that piece. It burns very fast, and that can be put into some dry grass and then blown to a flame. But I'm not going to do that now.
Instead, I'm going in search of one creature that's vital to the forest's survival that could easily be missed unless you know what you're looking for. These large mounds of pine needles are actually wood ant nests that have been carefully constructed to absorb maximum heat from the sun while allowing rainwater to flow off the nest. It's a great example of a symbiotic relationship, a kind of you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours arrangement. Because in return for the pine needles, the ants patrol the pines for unwanted pests, such as caterpillars that otherwise would damage the trees.
One of the classic animals of this pine forest, I think, isn't it?
Insect ecologist Dr. Mark Young has a lifelong fascination with these industrious creatures.
This is like a city, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Here it is on the top with the thatch of pine needles there, and you can see the holes where they go back down inside all over the place. And right down at the bottom, I expect there will be an old pine stump, and around it will be the queen and the eggs she laid, and then the grubs, which have to be fed by the adults, and then the pupae, the little, often called ants' eggs, right down in the middle there.
So when they're out foraging, what are they actually up to?
Well, the adult ants here need fuel for walking about, and that's principally plant sap, or particularly with these things, the honeydew that's produced by aphids and caterpillars and weevils and anything else like that. They'll bring back as protein, food for their grubs.
How do the ants find their way backwards and forwards? Because when you watch them, you can see distinct trails that they're following.
As they go along, they trail their body behind and they dot little bits of chemical or pheromones, and they dot them onto their trail. So what they're doing is they're following the scent that the others have put down.
And how long do these pheromone markers remain?
Relatively short time, a matter of hours. It depends on the weather and on rainfall and other things like that. So that's what's going on. I'm getting a bit covered in ants. I'm going to stand up a bit.
No worries. I think they're amazing creatures. This is a glorious bit of forest, and it holds a secret because this is a capercaillie leg, and I'm going to be spending the night here with a cameraman in the hope that we'll be able to film the capercaillie on the leg.
The lek is an elaborate courtship display where male capercaillies strut their stuff to attract females. At up to 3 feet tall, these elusive birds are the world's largest and most endangered grouse. They depend upon these old pine forests where they feed on pine needles and berries and use clearings in the undergrowth to play out their dramatic rituals.
It's a very secret location because these birds are so rare, and we're the only people this year who will be allowed to film here. And every time people come in, you pick a different trail. So we don't even make a footpath in here. And now it's just a matter of settling in now before the birds come in to roost. And hopefully they'll be on the lek in the morning in front of the hide. Fingers crossed. He's about, I'd say that's 60, 70 metres away.
This male capercaillie looks like a rather pompous character from a 19th century costume drama, but in fact he's proudly and rather fiercely guarding his patch of ground from other males.
I can still see one of the male birds displaying up there on a rise. Been in the hide now 17 hours. Almost as soon as the sun set, we heard capercaillie roosting right on top of us, which made it very difficult for us in the hide. We had to be as quiet as church mice as not to disturb them. We got ready at 3 o'clock in the morning, and at 4:10, well before first light, they were out and starting to display, and there was a cockbird chasing a hen across here. Really frustrating that just out of sight from our hide was the most enormous battle between two cockbirds. Since then, they've dispersed and we're just getting fleeting glimpses of them through the undergrowth like that one up there.
Just when I thought it was over, 2 males appear in front of our hide, giving off their distinctive clopping warning call. Neither is willing to back down. a furious fight breaks out. Finally, the victor retreats to claim his females.
This is one of the rarest sights in wild Britain. It's an incredible thing to see, and a real privilege.